The night hadn't even hit yet, and Levia and Zighelm were already back in bed. He was sure his ice princess wanted him to stay, otherwise she'd miss him like crazy. Zighelm was right, and she returned his caresses and kisses. And just a little while ago, when she lost her father and her whole people, she couldn't have imagined what fate had in store for her. Once upon a time, the creator of the world rejoiced in the prosperity of mankind. He gifted the kings with a core of magical power, and each of them possessed different abilities. The rulers of the Aeson kingdom possessed the power of ice, generation after generation. They grew a special tea called para in their lands. King's daughter Levia hitched up her skirts and helped the farmers in the fields. Her father always got mad when he saw her legs exposed, but it was way easier for her to move around the bushes like that. Then again, he'd always been the same way, never afraid of hard work. In that little kingdom, the heroine felt incredibly happy and thought it would last forever. But everything changed the day a man arrived, his face hidden under a mask and cloak. Bolting awake in the middle of the night from a weird noise, Levia and her father found everyone around them turned to stone. The king grabbed his bewildered daughter's hand and said they had to get out of there, like yesterday. The whole kingdom was filling up with fog, and anyone who breathed it in turned into stone. The fact that Levia and her father were still alive meant the fog didn't work on people with magical abilities. But they couldn't escape the palace, because that stranger was already waiting for them around the corner. The king shielded Levia, grabbed the stranger by the shoulders, and blasted him with freezing cold, but the guy still managed to jam a dagger into his chest. Both of them went down, and the heroine screamed and rushed to her father. Tears streaming down her face, Levia desperately tried to use her magic to stop the bleeding, but it was no use. As he died, the king told his daughter to live on and be happy, saying that as long as she lived, Aeson would live on too. The heroine broke down, sobbing, not understanding how this could have happened, when just a short time ago, everyone was alive and happy. Her grief was so overwhelming that she lost control of her magic, and soon everything around her was covered in ice. Levia herself froze, unable to move and ready to meet her own end. Saying goodbye to life, she begged her father's forgiveness for failing to fulfill his wish, because she didn't feel like she had the strength to go on living in a world where everyone she loved was gone. The heat from the man's body, as he entered the palace, melted the ice that covered everything. He lifted the girl from the floor and held her close to warm her up, repeating that he wouldn't let her die. Opening her eyes, Levia found herself in a field of daisies, bathed in warm sunlight. Up ahead, she saw her father walking towards the horizon. Figuring she might be dead, she asked him to wait up so they could go on together. But when Levia reached for him, a blast of heat hit her, and her father's figure started to blur. The girl opened her eyes in a strange room, with a bowl of hot soup on the table. Looking around, for a second, she thought it had all been a dream. Suddenly, Levia heard a voice and realized she was being held by some redhead. Startled, she tried to get away, but her frozen body wouldn't respond. Calling her Levia de la Aeson, the guy told her to chill out. He explained her body was ice cold, and he used his power to warm her up. Hearing that, she realized she was being held by Zighelm, the Emperor of Freygund. Zighelm von Freygund wielded the power of fire and was known for conquering all the nearby kingdoms, one after another. Rumor had it let's just say his relationships with women didn't end well. And now this dangerous dude, who struck terror into everyone, suddenly showed up in the Aeson kingdom. Thinking the emperor might be connected to what happened back home, Levia straight up asked him about it. Zighelm denied it, but she still couldn't figure out what brought him to Aeson. Because of her worry, the warmth of his hands stopped comforting her, and she started freezing again. Zighelm suggested talking about it later, and then, out of nowhere, kissed Levia on the lips. She felt how hot they were, and warmth started spreading through her body again. Still, kissing a stranger was way out of line, so she tried to pull away again, but no dice. Zighelm told her to hang in there, claiming that transferring warmth through the mouth was way more effective. Finally, after a while, thanks to von Freygund's hot lips and hands, Levia's body thawed out, and she even started feeling hot. The guy grabbed a towel and started wiping up the melted ice. He figured the girl must have gone through some serious crap, 'cause mana gets all wonky when you're hit with heavy emotions, and powers can go haywire. Zighelm called Levia lucky, saying she could have frozen solid if he hadn't found her, and warmed her up. But she wasn't so sure about being called lucky when she was the only survivor from the entire kingdom, especially now that she had nowhere to go and everyone she loved was dead. Lavia was just a little kid when she lost her mom, but her dad and everyone in the kingdom had her back, helping her get through it. She wanted to grow up and be an awesome queen to repay them for their kindness, but now that dream was totally shot. Pulling her close, Zighelm told her not to give up on the life she'd been given. Even if the kingdom's gone and the pain feels like too much, she's got to keep going. He added that her dad and the people she loved would definitely want that for her. You know, it really was her father's dying wish. The heroine was totally confused about why the Flame Emperor was trying to save her, so she asked him point blank. Zighelm smirked, kissed her hand, and asked what she thought the reason was. The only thing that popped into her head was that he was after her power. Maybe he wanted to exploit another country's supernatural abilities. Royal family kidnappings had happened before, after all. But Zighelm told her that wasn't it at all. He promised to explain everything later, but for now, he suggested she eat. He grabbed a bowl of soup from the table and offered it to Lavia. The heroine started eating and told the emperor to stop staring at her like that. Turning away, Zighelm confessed that he owed a debt to the kingdom of Icene, and that's why he helped Lavia. But the girl had never heard anything about him being connected to her kingdom in any way. Zighelm said it's a long story, and even if he told it, she wouldn't believe him anyway. He was sure time would tell, and then Lavia could decide for herself how much she could trust him. Once he was sure the ice had completely thawed, Zighelm suggested they head to the Fragumd Empire. The heroine was hesitant, wondering if she should trust this guy and follow him. Noticing her hesitation, Zighelm asked if she wanted to know why the kingdom of Aeson was destroyed. And the truth was, more than anything, the heroine wanted to know why they all had to go through what happened. Since she couldn't do it alone, this man, the emperor of a great nation, could definitely help her. Even though Lavia didn't know what the consequences would be, her father sacrificed his life for her, so she decided to take this chance for the greater good. Zighelm carried the girl in his arms to his palace, whose incredible size and wealth amazed her. The heroine asked him to put her down, worried that he might be tired. I mean, he carried her in his arms both before, putting her on the horse, and after they got to the castle. Inside, they were met by Wix Hartlieb, Zighelm's assistant, who was totally surprised to see his lord with a girl. He had no idea where his lord had suddenly disappeared to, and now he figured he'd kidnapped someone. The emperor got pissed, asking Wix what he thought he was, and declared he was protecting this girl. Zighelm carried Lavia to a room and ordered his assistant to have a list of maids ready by morning. Wix told his lord he shouldn't do that again, and Zighelm, after sitting the girl on the couch, asked her to wait a minute while he went to talk to the kid. The heroine thought the Flame Emperor was a tyrant who used force to control people, but the atmosphere in the castle was totally different. Left alone, the girl started freezing again, and a shiver ran through her body. After talking to his lord, Wix returned in a completely different mood and politely introduced himself to Princess Icena. Taking advantage of the moment while the emperor wasn't looking, he asked the girl if his lord had been treating her badly. Lavia's mind instantly flashed back to those steamy kisses with Zighelm, and her face went bright red. Seeing how flustered the princess was, Vix gave a sly grin and asked the boss what he'd done to her. Burning with embarrassment, the heroine grabbed Zighelm's shirt and begged him not to say a word. The emperor shoved a cloak in Vix's face and kicked him out of the room. Near the door, he whispered to his aide that everyone in the Aeson kingdom had turned to stone. Zighelm ordered a research team to be sent there to figure out what happened. The heroine was curious about what they were talking about, but she couldn't hear a thing. The cold just wouldn't go away and started enveloping her body with renewed force. When Zighelm asked if she needed anything, Lavia asked for a cloak. The girl looked at her hand and saw that it was starting to ice over again. The emperor rushed to her, knelt down and hugged her, and she begged him to do something to stop it. Holding Lavia close, Zighelm could feel how unstable her mana was. These kinds of disruptions were supposed to fix themselves naturally. But when a disruption happens, the healing process is slower, and the stronger the abilities, the higher the chance of it happening again. So Zighelm kissed Lavia again, without asking, hoping to thaw her out. But this time, for some reason, the girl felt absolutely none of the Flame Emperor's warmth. This was super dangerous, and if it kept going on like this, the frostbite could kill her. Zekhelm declared that he needed to warm up the mana inside her body. Lavia didn't understand exactly how he was going to do that, and he explained that they needed to become one. To convince her, the Flame Emperor reminded her that she couldn't die before she learned the truth about what happened in the Aeson Kingdom. Kissing her hand, he vowed to do everything to save the girl from death. Lavia knew she really needed to learn the truth, so she couldn't be afraid, and she no longer had any reason to hold back. No matter the cost, she had to survive for the sake of her loved ones, and so the heroine agreed to let him have his way. The girl was only worried that Zekhelm would freeze, but he was sure that such ice couldn't extinguish his fire. With each touch, Lavia's body began to thaw, but then immediately iced over again, and Zekhelm asked her to just relax. The heroine tried to convince herself that she wasn't scared at all, and he, kissing her forehead, promised to be gentle. After a while, feeling the inhuman heat of his skin, Lavia herself was begging him not to stop. When the girl fell asleep, Zekhelm touched her face to make sure she had completely thawed. He was ready to repeat this as many times as necessary if this method would allow him to control her mana. Waking up in the morning, the heroine felt how well she had slept. She woke up, and the first thing she saw was a maid standing by the bed. The girl introduced herself as Misella and said His Majesty had assigned her to be the lady's personal maid. She was blown away by Lavia's beauty, saying she looked like an ice fairy. Misella also mentioned His Majesty was away on business, and she'd already drawn a bath for the lady. Soaking in the hot bath, she replayed the events of the previous night in her head. She felt uneasy about the compromising situations she'd had to get into just to survive. But later, after getting dressed, Lavia convinced herself it was all necessary to stay alive. She couldn't afford to regret doing what she had to do to uncover the truth behind her kingdom's downfall. Dressed, she stepped out onto the balcony and gazed out at the Fragmed Empire. It was massive, completely different from the kingdom of Ison. Misella invited the lady to the table for breakfast, offering her Mitsumo fruit pie and para tea. According to the maid, His Majesty personally brought this tea from the Aeson Kingdom. Levi knew there were no trade relations between Aeson and Fragum, meaning the Emperor got this tea himself. Taking a sip, the heroine felt as if she were back in her homeland. She remembered the time she spent on the tea plantations and the smiles of the people she loved. Lavi smiled and thanked Misella for the delicious drink, which she brewed perfectly, something not many could do. The maid confessed that her mother was from the Aeson Kingdom, grew this tea at home, and taught her daughter how to brew it. Realizing that Zekhelm had deliberately given her a helper with roots in her home kingdom, Levi thought that he probably deserved her trust, at least a little. The heroine asked Misella to make her more tea, and she happily went to carry out the task. At that moment, Lavi heard male voices from below, discussing how His Majesty brought a princess from the Ice Kingdom with him. Realizing they were talking about her, the girl started listening in. The people were gossiping about the princess's legendary beauty and dreaming of meeting her. Suddenly, one of them blurted out that the Ice Princess, on top of everything else, hadn't even, been burned, securing the Emperor's favor, which in turn meant that His Majesty might finally have a shot at getting an heir. The Emperor entered the throne room, where his subjects were already waiting for him. Zekhelm settled onto the throne and asked if any problems had popped up while he was gone. Turns out, Chancellor Barbado had fallen ill and was now recovering at home. When asked what was happening in other regions of the empire, the subjects replied that everything was the same as always. That answer made the Emperor think, because turning an entire kingdom to stone was definitely a big deal. Some country was definitely involved in this, but Zekhelm had never heard of petrification before. He decided to play it cool until the recon team got back. Out of nowhere, some dude steps up, wanting to hit the Emperor with a question. He was all like, "What's the deal with you bringing the Ice Kingdom princess to the palace?" Zekhelm didn't think he owed him an explanation, but the guy kept pushing, wanting to know if he was thinking about marrying Lavi. The Emperor got so pissed he practically burst into flames and told them he'd tell them what he damn well pleased. Watching all this, Vix was thinking about how gentle and caring Zekhelm had been around the Ice Princess. But now he was totally different. The real-deal Emperor of Flames, wielding the most insane firepower ever. After the meeting, Vix told His Majesty that Barbado should be back in the saddle in about 3 days. The aide pointed out that the Chancellor must have been majorly burned out, 'cause someone just up and vanished, dumping all the work on him. Vix was wondering when exactly the Emperor found out about the planned hit on Aeson. Zighelm just said he didn't know anything and that it was all just a coincidence. His aides still found it hard to believe it was random chance that he showed up in the kingdom on the very day of the incident. Zighelm, for his part, was thinking that if he'd arrived in the kingdom sooner, Levia wouldn't have gotten hurt so badly. When he walked into the room, he found her praying by the window. He asked if she was praying for her homeland and offered to join her, but Levia didn't see the point. Zighelm couldn't help but notice she was in a bad mood, but when he suggested she was upset he wasn't there when she woke up, she said that wasn't it. The truth was, she couldn't get the conversation she'd overheard out of her head. They were talking about whether a princess from such a small kingdom could ever become the emperor's wife. His Majesty has always said he'll only marry a woman he truly desires. If Levia could handle the marriage bed, she stood a real chance of becoming his wife. After hearing all this, it all clicked. So, our girl decided to ask Zighelm straight up. Did he save her just to have her bear him an heir? She figured, if that was the truth, he should have just said so from the start, instead of lying about some debt to Aeson. When he asked who told her this, she said the rumors were just blowing in on the winds of the empire. According to them, the Flame Emperor was just hunting for a woman who could withstand his heat and give him an heir. But Zighelm shot that down, saying he only meant he'd marry someone he truly desired, plain and simple. Lavia wasn't against him using her for his own ends, seeing as she was using him to survive and to uncover the truth behind her kingdom's tragedy. That's why she proposed a deal with the Emperor. Touching her face, Zighelm wondered what exactly he could offer her in that case. Lavia decided to seize the chance to establish equal footing with the Emperor. He was supposed to help her control her powers and investigate the fall of the Aeson kingdom. And in return, she promised to bear him a child, since only she, with her ice powers, could withstand his fire. Zighelm considered these terms of the deal perfectly fair. However, Lavia added that if she didn't get what she wanted, the agreement would be voided. And then, according to her, she'd have to make a deal with someone else. The thought of Lavia offering herself to someone else pissed Zighelm off. He reminded her that if she decided to leave him before her mana stabilized, she could freeze to death. She smiled and replied that she knew that, and that's exactly why she hoped he'd cooperate with her until the very end. Picking Lavia up in his arms, the Emperor suggested they seal their contract then. He sat her on the bed, promising to stabilize her mana and find out what happened in the Aeson kingdom, and she, in turn, would give him a child. The heroine promised she wouldn't try to become empress and would leave the palace as soon as she gave birth. Zighelm covered her mouth with his finger, stopping her from finishing, and said that would be enough. To seal the deal, he raised his hand to the girl's ear, and it blazed with bright fire. A warm earring appeared on her ear, created by the Flame Emperor's mana. Then the girl reached out and touched Zighelm's ear, and a cold earring made of her ice mana appeared on his. The heroine was surprised by how happily the Emperor smiled at that. Once again, she realized she didn't understand this guy at all. Nevertheless, it would now be easier for Lavia to make her own demands of him. And although it might sound strange, she admitted she wanted to return to the kingdom of Aeson to look for clues. The heroine thought she could remember her father telling her to find something before he died. Her powers were fading, making the memories fuzzy, but maybe going back there would jog something loose. After hearing her out, Zighelm told her to hold up, but she reminded him, with some heat, about his end of the deal. The Emperor told Lavia to chill, pointing out that the contract also covered stabilizing her mana. He wasn't sure they could be positive the princess wouldn't lose control again the second they stepped back into the kingdom. First, she needed to get some rest. She had to be wiped out after yesterday. It was confusing, but she couldn't argue with the Emperor's logic. His concerns weren't wrong. Then, Zighelm announced he'd get everything set up for her stay at the palace, including the dresses. The very next day, a mountain of outfits was waiting for her in her room, all for her to try on. Since Lavia knew there was no way she could try them all, the Emperor suggested picking a few that fit well, so the tailor could just adjust the rest to the same size. The girl tried on a few more dresses, each one a different style, and every single one looked amazing on her. Even though Micella loved that fiery red dress, the heroine felt way more comfortable in blue. The maid was helping Levi change when, bam, her hair got caught in the clasp. Micella tried to untangle it, but no luck, so the heroine suggested just snipping it off. Just then, Zieghelm walked into the fitting room and declared he could handle it himself. Levi thought he was being a jerk, but he ignored her and just told her to let him take a look. After that, the emperor ordered Marcella to take the dresses that needed alterations to the tailor. Alone with the girl, he came up behind her and started untangling her hair. Lavi was flustered, because he was standing way too close for comfort. In a flash, Zieghelm managed to free her hair without her even feeling a thing. Leaning in close, he whispered in her ear that the dress looked amazing on her. Lavia snapped, telling him to get a grip and just cut the strand if he couldn't untangle it. Zieghelm, cool as a cucumber, said he already took care of it and offered to help her get the dress off. Flustered, she told him that was enough and asked him to get out of the dressing room. But as she turned, she tripped on the hem of the dress and went sprawling onto a pile of boxes at her feet. Zieghelm managed to get there in time, and Lavia ended up falling right on top of him. He chuckled, saying she couldn't be left alone for a second. The heroine apologized and started to get up. Her hand brushed against something solid, and Zieghelm, grabbing her hand, smirked and told the princess to stop playing around. She felt the heat radiating from him, and memories of their night together flooded back. Stroking her face, Zieghelm asked what she was thinking about with that look on her face. She tried to dodge the question, but he touched her chest and said he couldn't help himself when she looked so incredible. Ziegel was taken aback by Lavia telling him to back off, especially since she was still straddling him, which kinda suggested the opposite. Just then, Marcella walked back in and froze, totally shocked to find them on the floor in such a compromising position. The princess was sitting on the emperor, who was holding her hand, and his shirt was completely undone. The maid covered her face with her hands, and apologizing for interrupting, bolted out of the room. Later, back in her room, Lavia was getting another apology from Marcella. The lady told her she had nothing to apologize for, and that she should be thanking her for walking in on them when she did. Because if Marcella hadn't come back, who knows what might have happened? Lavia decided to ask the maid how many women the emperor had been with, because he seemed pretty experienced. But Marcella said she'd never heard any rumors like that. In fact, His Majesty was actually known for turning down advances from the ladies. The way he cared for Princess Lavia really threw Marcella for a loop. She knew the rumors going around other countries about the emperor, taking care of women after they, spent time together, but she hadn't heard anything like that herself. Even so, Lavia was convinced Zieghelm only treated her well because she was the only one who could handle his intensity. But our girl decided not to dwell on it and asked Marcella to show her around the palace, since the emperor gave her the green light. The maid led her to a massive library, packed with books from all over. The balcony in that library had the best view of the garden in the whole palace. Next up, they hit the art gallery, full of paintings by the imperial artists. On the staircase, you could catch these amazing smells coming from the imperial kitchen. Heading downstairs, our heroine met a cat the soldiers had taken in. Then they went to the garden, passing through an archway covered in gorgeous red roses. Marcella was showing Lavia around the castle with so much excitement and joy, it was actually giving her energy. As they walked down the hall, the maid showed the lady her favorite little statue, a bird. She sheepishly admitted she'd almost swiped it for her room more times than she could count. Seeing how much Marcella really wanted it, the heroine used her magic to conjure up an identical crystal figure for her. It was Lavia's way of thanking the girl for being so kind to her. Marcella was over the moon to get a gift from her mistress, promising to treasure it like a family heirloom. Two guys were watching everything, whispering to each other. The second they noticed Lavia looking their way, they ducked around the corner. The heroine figured that, unlike Marcella, not everyone here was exactly thrilled to have her around. She thanked the maid for the tour of the castle and said she wanted to head back to her chambers. But suddenly, some random dude appeared right in front of Lavia. Wearing this smug grin, he asked if he was actually looking at the Ice Princess herself. Staring her down, he said he finally understood how such a knockout managed to get the emperor's attention. Marcella told him to knock it off, saying he was being way out of line. The guy slapped her, pissed that some lady's maid dared to interrupt him. The heroine rushed to Marcella, who'd fallen to the floor, dropping and shattering a crystal bird. The guy remarked that he'd heard about the fall of the Aeson Kingdom, and the princess was clearly willing to do anything to survive now. With a nasty smirk, he asked Lavia if her late father taught her that particular survival trick. The heroine stood up, and a wave of icy cold rolled off of her. Frowning, Lavia said he could say whatever he wanted about her, but she'd never let him drag her father into it. The jerk just laughed and asked if she was going to ice over everyone who rubbed her the wrong way. She could feel her mana getting all wonky again. She was scared of losing control and accidentally hitting Micella. The guy kept pushing her buttons, acting surprised she was reacting to the truth during a normal conversation. Lavia could hear her heart pounding, but she was trying to chill out. Then, out of nowhere, a guy's voice boomed, asking the jerk how he dared call a one-sided attempt to provoke someone a dialogue. The jerk spun around, freezing in terror. The Emperor, practically burning with rage, was standing in the hallway, glaring at him with pure contempt. Sieghelm covered Lavia's icy face with his warm hand and told her to calm down. His warmth wrapped around her completely, keeping her from freezing up. Watching them, the guy was pissed at how His Majesty was treating that girl. He declared that, as Emperor of Fragund, he shouldn't be fooled by some girl from a two-bit kingdom. The man insisted that Sieghelm should marry a noblewoman, someone worthy of his status. His eyes flashing with rage, the Emperor ordered him to cut the crap, saying he hadn't said a word about choosing a bride. Sieghelm reminded him again to mind his own business, and flames engulfed the jerk from all sides. The Emperor held out his hand and suggested they see what happens if he keeps offering unsolicited advice. The man got unbearably hot and started screaming, terrified he'd be burned alive. Unable to take the heat anymore, he jumped from the second floor straight into the fountain below. Lavia, who only ever saw the Emperor calm, had almost forgotten he had another side to him. The truth is, he was a dangerous dude, striking fear into everyone. Sieghelm patted the heroine on the head, telling her she handled herself great. Lavia thanked him, saying she managed to keep her powers in check thanks to him. Sieghelm was sorry some people in the palace were giving her trouble, and promised to have a word with them. The heroine understood the nobles couldn't just sit back while a woman suddenly stole the Emperor's complete attention. Even with their agreement, she had to stay on her toes. Micella, teary-eyed, showed her mistress the broken bird. She apologized to Lavia for not keeping her promise to take care of the gift. Her sincerity and kindness really touched the heroine's heart, and she told her not to worry about it. Claiming the bird breaks to hide when it feels threatened, Lavia waved her hand, and the statue was whole again. The maid, crying, thanked her mistress, who in turn thanked her for protecting it. After she went back to her room, Siegel followed and asked her to make him a little bird just like Micella's. Lavia couldn't even imagine what he wanted it for. She told him that even if she did give him a bird, it would just break right away. Siegel suggested she let the bird decide for itself if he was really that dangerous. Reminding herself that the Emperor had helped her out, and it wouldn't kill her to do him a favor, she agreed. She asked him for a wine glass and gave him a playful wink. Taking the glass, Lavia enveloped it in her ice magic. A few seconds later, she held out the glass, now decorated with an ice bird, as a thank you. She told him not to worry, because made this way, the falcon wouldn't melt from his touch. Siegel was captivated by the gift and promised to treasure it. Micella knocked on the door and announced that the bath was ready for the lady. Sitting in the tub, the heroine remembered Sieghelm's happy face. Turns out, he could find joy in the simplest things. It reminded her of her father, who also used to ask Lavia to make ice sculptures for her. The king was just as happy with those little gifts from his daughter. She never saw it herself, but she heard that he carefully kept them all somewhere. Lavia really wanted her father to always smile, so she constantly practiced making all sorts of figures. The memories stirred up emotions in the heroine, and a tear ran down her cheek. The girl reminded herself that she shouldn't cry, and she needed to stay strong to figure out the truth about what happened in her kingdom. But the tear had already fallen into the bath, and in the blink of an eye, it froze all the water solid. Lavia couldn't believe it, because her mana was supposed to be stable by now. Just then, Micella came over to check the water temperature, and when she saw ice in the tub, she screamed and dropped the towel. Dropping everything, the maid ran out to get the Emperor's help. Even though Lavia didn't want Sieghelm to see her naked, Micella couldn't hear her anymore. A moment later, the Emperor burst into the bathroom. Before the maid came to get him, Sieghelm was in his study, listening to Vix's report on what he'd managed to find out. News of the kingdom of Isen's mysterious downfall had already spread among the nobles through merchants from different countries. As the Emperor pondered this, Vix suddenly added that there were some other disturbing rumors circulating among the nobles. They say Princess Lavia is cursed, and that's why the kingdom of Isen fell. If she stays in Fregeland, the Empire will suffer the same fate. Seething with anger, Zieghelm declared that their imaginations were running wild. Vix figured it was to be expected. Turning an entire kingdom to stone is just unbelievable, and fear of the unknown always leads to crazy speculation. The Emperor thought that was total BS, seeing as Levia was a victim in all this too. He was so pissed, he incinerated the document in his hand and ordered Vix to shut everyone up. Before leaving, the aide also mentioned the unit sent to Icene was due back tomorrow. Just as Vix said they'd found evidence of a crime in the kingdom, there was a knock at the door. Marcella burst into the office, saying Lady Levias almost froze to death in the bath. Zieghelm tapped the ice, confirming the bathwater was completely frozen solid. When asked if she was hurt, Lavia said her body was fine. Only the water froze. Looking away, she admitted it probably wasn't related to her unstable mana. Zieghelm reminded her that her powers are always fluctuating, and a burst of ice energy could have just slipped out for a second. He cupped her face in his hands and looked intently into her eyes. Not wanting him to know she'd been crying, Lavia told him to hurry and help her out. Zieghelm put his scorching hand on the ice and started melting it. He mentioned how sometimes he zones out in the bath and the water accidentally boils, so if they were in the water together, the temperature would always be perfect. Lavia doubted that, figuring his power was way stronger than his control, but the Emperor was ready to argue about it. After all, if he used that much magic near anyone else, they'd be toast instantly. The ice slowly started to melt, and panic set in for our girl. She knew that once it was completely melted, the water would clear up, and the Emperor would see everything. So, flustered, Lavia asked him to look the other way while he melted the ice. Even though Zieghelm was clearly surprised by her request, he promised he'd try and turn around. After a while, Marcella was already tearing up, overjoyed that her mistress had been saved. The Emperor scooped Levi up in his arms to carry her to her room. Even though she protested, saying she wasn't frozen and could walk, Marcella watched with adoration as her master cared for her. Zieghelm carried her to the bedroom, sat her on the bed, and said her mana was still unstable. He touched her earring and offered to stabilize her mana so she wouldn't get frozen again. But he thought they shouldn't go too far this time, so he told her to relax. Zieghelm kissed Levi, and she felt a heat coming from his lips, warming her whole body. Seeing the pleasure on her face, he asked if she liked it. Flustered, she turned away and said it wasn't the kiss, but the pleasant warmth. Zieghelm pulled her closer, offering to give her even more then. He noticed the hand that had been pushing him away was now trembling and clutching his coat. A warmth enveloped her, seeping into her very core, and she craved more of it. Deciding he'd warmed her up enough, Zieghelm pulled back slightly, but she felt the chill creeping back in, and unwilling to let him go, she pulled him close and kissed him this time. Realizing what she'd done, Lavia jumped back from Zieghelm like a startled rabbit, burning with embarrassment. She went to the window, but the Emperor approached, embracing her from behind. Doubting she'd say it meant nothing now, he held her close, saying he wouldn't let go until she admitted why she kissed him first. Not thinking of anything better, she blurted out that it was a kiss of gratitude. She claimed she wanted to thank him for sharing his firepower and return the favor with her ice power. Zieghelm released her, and Levia figured that answer must have satisfied him. But his expression was deeply thoughtful, and she had no idea what it could possibly mean. The heroine figured maybe a kiss wasn't enough to say thanks, and asked the Emperor about it. But he said that wasn't the case at all, and with a flick of his wrist, fire blazed in his palm. In a heartbeat, a fiery phoenix was blazing in his hand, and he offered it to Lavia. Since she was always in danger of freezing, and he might not always be there in time, the bird could provide warmth in his place. The heroine was blown away, because she could never create something with power that moved on its own. But Zieghelm was sure that with practice, Lavia could make something like it too. The girl gently stroked the bird, which shimmered softly with warm flames. Maybe it was because her own mana was unstable, but watching the sparks of fire calmed her down. Lately, the heroine had started wondering if it was okay that she was getting way more from Zieghelm than she was giving back. Later, when the Emperor came out of the bath, Lavia was already asleep. When she kissed him, he felt a real fire from her, like she wanted things to go further. But now, replaying it all in his head, Zieghelm was starting to wonder if that was even real. Waking up the next morning, the heroine found herself in the Emperor's arms. She tried to get free, but he was holding her so tight, Lavia couldn't even twitch. This was unusual, since he was usually long gone by the time she woke up. The heroine stared at the sleeping Zighelm, who looked pretty vulnerable in his sleep. She touched the hard muscles on his chest, amazed at how ripped he'd gotten. Just then, the guy suddenly snapped his eyes open and, grabbing Lavia's hand, demanded to know what she was doing. Before she could answer or even apologize for waking him, Zighelm nipped her finger and told her not to do that, because even he had his limits. His voice was rougher and deeper than usual. Even half asleep, his eyes had that look, like a predator who's always hungry. She was flustered, saying she didn't recall agreeing to him hugging her in his sleep. But Zighelm explained he was sleeping on his side, and she was the one who rolled over to him. The bell tower chimed, and only then did the Emperor realize how late it had gotten. Walking to the window, he said he wanted to show Lavia something and asked her to get ready. From the window, he saw a reconnaissance team approaching the castle. A little later, dressed and ready, the Emperor and Princess were already talking with the team members. They brought with them items they managed to recover from the Kingdom of Isen. According to the report, the ice covering the royal palace had completely thawed. Many of those turned to stone crumbled to dust, and the research team collected items found near that dust. Zighelm, trying to comfort Lavia, touched her shoulder and told her that the King of Aisen was buried not far from the palace. He suggested they go there together, once she was feeling up to it, to lay flowers on his grave. With a heavy heart, she thanked him and turned to the table where the recovered items lay. Among them was a handkerchief she'd given to her maid, Anna, a fountain pen that the captain had always guarded so carefully, and a ring that belonged to Lavia's father when he was alive. The heroine picked up the precious item and clutched it to her chest, her heart pounding. Then, composing herself, she thanked everyone on the investigation team. As the Princess of Aisen, she expressed her deepest gratitude to His Majesty Zighelm and everyone who went to her homeland. The Emperor also sent the sand collected by the expedition team for analysis, believing that if they could understand the petrification process, they could identify the culprit. There was no doubt that some kind of special power was involved in that fog that turned everyone to stone. So, there was hope that traces of that magic remained in the sand. Suddenly, Livia's eyes fell on the keys to her father's study. And just then, the heroine clearly remembered his last words about needing to check his desk drawer to find something that would help her. That's why she told His Majesty that she needed to return to the kingdom immediately. At that very moment, the knight standing behind her shouted that it was all her fault, and a sharp dagger flashed in his hand, ready to strike a deadly blow against the princess. The Emperor managed to react in time and shielded Lavia, taking the blade on his own arm. The spray of blood momentarily brought back the memory of her father's murder. Constricting the attacker in flames, the Emperor menacingly asked if he had any last words. The young man gritted his teeth in pain and replied that his sister had married into the Aisen kingdom. When he got there with the rest of the investigation team, he found her turned to stone, just like the others. The kid couldn't figure out why Lavia was the only one who survived in a kingdom where absolutely everyone else bit the dust. I mean, if she couldn't protect them as a princess, shouldn't she have gone down with the ship too? But since everything around her turned to stone, except for her, it had to mean Lavia was cursed. As Zighelm listened to all this, he got angrier and angrier, barely keeping his mana in check. He turned to look at Lavia, who at that moment started to get covered in ice. The girl was whispering that it was all her fault, begging for forgiveness, and freezing up even more. Her mana suddenly went haywire again. Icy energy flooded out, and Zighelm rushed to Lavia to stop it. The fire phoenix flew over too, circling above them, trying to warm her up. Feeling that the blizzard had suddenly stopped, Vix opened his eyes. The king's bird just blew up in size, covering them both with its massive wings. Inside, Zighelm was freezing solid with Lavia unconscious, but he was still holding her tight. Vix tried to get closer, but the Emperor forbade anyone from approaching. The aide couldn't believe his eyes, shocked that Zighelm, who always had this crazy fire aura, was covered in ice. If it weren't for that flame bird, everyone else in the room would have been popsicles by now. As for the guy who attacked Lavia, the Emperor ordered him grabbed and thrown in the slammer. The other scouts hesitantly asked Vix if the princess was really cursed or something. He said that wasn't the case, and then asked if they'd seen the thief's body. When they said no, Vix got to thinking, because that was way different from what the Emperor said. Maybe the guy just bounced back before the scouting team got there. Anyway, Vix ordered the soldiers to never speak of the curse again if they cared about the Empire's future. He was sure that if Lady Levi was lost, Zighelm would be way more dangerous than any curse. That's why Vix really hoped the girl would pull through and be okay. After laying the heroine on the bed, Zighelm begged her to be strong and not give up. There was no time to waste, so he ripped off his shirt and burst into bright flames. The Emperor asked Levi to hang in there, even if it got a little hot, and pressed close to the ice-cold girl. He kissed her lips passionately, trying to warm her, and the dress she was wearing instantly burst into flames and burned away completely. Thoughts and feelings rushed back to the heroine. She felt like she couldn't move and realized she was frozen again. Noticing that she'd come to, Zighelm said everything would be all right, and he'd melt her. When Levi could speak again, she said that guy was right, and she really couldn't protect anyone. But the Emperor insisted it wasn't her fault, saying he couldn't protect them either, so he begged her to at least let him protect her. The heroine couldn't figure out why he looked so tormented in that moment. The next day, Wix admitted he felt relieved to see the Emperor and Princess were okay, and when Zighelm said the aide was exaggerating, he jumped in, saying they were seriously worried and scared they'd freeze solid. When asked about his hand, the Emperor said Levi healed it first thing this morning. The heroine wanted to know what happened to the others in the room when her powers went haywire. Wix said they were all fine and told the lady not to worry about it. Still, the girl felt guilty about what happened and started apologizing again. But Zighelm declared it was his fault for not preventing the danger sooner, and for scaring her on top of it. Even so, the heroine didn't think the Flame Emperor had anything to apologize for, because that guy's anger wasn't totally unjustified. But she remembered Zighelm's words from last night, about how her craving his warmth meant she wanted to live. And she didn't need to do it for anyone else, she had to live for herself. Lavia really wanted to live, even after being shamed by the Emperor's interest, because she still had something she needed to do. Grabbing the key to her father's desk from the table, she asked Zighelm to let her go to the Aeson Kingdom. She explained that she remembered her father's last words, which had to be connected to what happened. Vix jumped in, saying the princess needed to rest after her powers went haywire. But Lavia thought they needed to act while yesterday's treatment was still working. After a moment's thought, the Emperor agreed and announced he'd be going with her. Vix practically jumped out of his skin when he heard that, but Zighelm wasn't backing down. He declared they'd be leaving for the Aeson Kingdom the very next day. That night, sitting on her bed, the heroine thought about how she was finally going home tomorrow. There weren't any people she cared about left in this place, but she reminded herself that it was her decision and she needed to stay focused. Suddenly, the dark room lit up, and Lavia looked up to see what was going on. Approaching the open balcony door, she saw millions of lights rising into the air. Looking closer, the heroine realized they were lanterns, and the beauty of the sight captivated her. Lavia had once heard that, in the Fragumd Empire, they launched burning lanterns into the sky to honor the souls of the dead. Zighelm entered the room and offered the girl to launch one too. The heroine took a lantern from his hands and released it into the sky to honor the memory of the dead in Icene among the lights of Fragumd. In her mind, she wished them to rest in peace and vowed to find out the truth about what happened. Suddenly, Lavia felt tears streaming down her cheeks and into her hands. She tried to force herself to calm down, so her father and everyone else wouldn't worry, watching her from above. Seeing her tears, Zighelm pulled her close and gave her a tight hug. He gently stroked Lavia's face and told her she shouldn't hold back her emotions. After all, in Fragum, they always believed that tears shed in memory of the fallen become their guide to the next world. And Lavia's tears shone with such purity that they would definitely be an excellent guide for those she loved. After hearing these kind words, she no longer held back her emotions and, clinging tightly to Zighelm's chest, wept bitterly. At that moment, it seemed to her that the Emperor didn't just hold the service, he organized it specifically in memory of those who died in Icene. Meanwhile, the dark-haired man prayed to the statue of the goddess to give him a sign that Lavia was alive. The next day, accompanied by the Emperor, she laid an ice flower on her father's grave. 2 days on the road, and on the morning of the 9th day since that terrible tragedy, Lavia returned to the kingdom of Ashen. She had the keys in her hands, and that's how she got into her dad's office. Once inside, the Emperor asked her about the king's last words. She told him her father said to look in the desk drawer, so Lavia opened it up. Inside was a keyhole, and she slipped one of the keys right in. The second she turned it, the whole room started shaking like crazy with a huge rumble. In a flash, Zighelm and Lavia saw the bookshelves swing open like a pair of doors. Behind them was a secret room, one she never even knew existed. Besides a ton of books and letters, there was a display case holding the figurines Lavia used to make for her dad. The fact that he'd hidden them in such a secure place really got to her. And while Zighelm was checking out the books on the shelves, she went over to a chest filled with some kind of letters. Opening one of them, the heroine found out they were proposals addressed to her. Among others, there were envelopes from the second prince of the Wind Kingdom and from the first prince of the Water Kingdom. And when Zighelm smirked that Lavia was pretty popular, she found a proposal from him too. The emperor's face immediately changed. He snatched the envelope from her and asked if she was really that surprised. But the girl just waved it off, saying she was more surprised that he was following protocol. Looking at the letters with interest, Zighelm wondered who her favorite was. According to Lavia, she was supposed to be the next queen of Isen, so she couldn't just pick whoever she wanted. Besides, she couldn't accept someone who only wanted the benefits of the marriage, and since no one fit the bill, the king kept turning them all down. However, the heroine now discovered that not everyone took rejection so well. Among other things, she found letters full of angry complaints directed at the kingdom. Even though the messages were similar, they came from different people, so it's unlikely someone was just holding a grudge. We decided to gather all the king's letters and records and take them with us to Fregumd. While the knights packed, the heroine stood by the bookshelves, wondering if her refusals had put the kingdom in danger. Suddenly, Zighelm came up behind her and pulled her close. When she asked what he was doing, the emperor said her face was gloomy, and he just wanted to make sure she wasn't getting cold again. Zighelm stroked her face and told her not to blame herself, sure that King Aeson didn't send her here for that. Levi was once again surprised at how the Flame Emperor always knew exactly what she was worried about. The heroine thanked him, admitting he was right, but added that he should stop trying to get fresh with her all the time. Zighelm playfully reminded her that she liked his warmth. But the girl, in a stern tone, told him not to say things like that in her father's study. The emperor apologized and let Lavia go, and that's when she noticed a weird envelope on the desk among the books. Taking a closer look, she recognized her father's handwriting and realized the letter was addressed to her. Maybe this envelope was the very thing the king wanted her to find. But suddenly, some noise came from the street, and Lavia asked the emperor, who was standing by the window, what was going on. Zighelm replied that the Water Kingdom's army had arrived at the palace. The black-haired guy leading them was demanding an explanation for why the Fire Empire's soldiers were there. He immediately suspected them of attacking the Aeson Kingdom and ordered his commander to be brought to him. Kaiser Ivan Shawadi, the first prince of the Shawadi Kingdom, was ready to dish out some justice. But then, Princess Aesing stepped out to stop him and tell him that she was the one who asked the Fregumd Empire for cooperation. Lavia explained that she asked them to help her uncover the truth about the fall of her kingdom. The prince's entourage was floored, not just by her showing up, but that the princess was even alive. Kaiser hopped off his horse, grabbed Lavia's hands, and for a moment, he just couldn't believe he was actually seeing her. The kingdom of Shawadi was a major rival to the Fregumd Empire, and always had Aeson's back. The girl was touched, realizing the prince was clearly worried about her, and she smiled. But then, Zighelm walked up, grabbed Kaisar's arm, and roughly pulled him away from Lavia. He announced that, for the time being, the princess was under the protection of the Fregumd Empire. Kaisar brushed Zighelm off, immediately recognizing him as the Flame Emperor. Turning to the girl, he asked if it was really her decision to turn to that guy for help. Lavia confirmed it, and explained how His Majesty had saved her from some serious trouble. The prince thanked Zighelm for saving the princess, and added that, from now on, she'd be under Shawadi's protection. While the emperor just watched, silent and fuming, the heroine demanded an explanation. Kaiser claimed that a lot of countries hated Fregumd, which Lavia had nothing to do with, and that living there would be tough for her. Kneeling before the princess, he vowed to uncover the truth about the fall of the Aeson Kingdom. He wrapped up his speech by asking Lavia to come with him to the Water Kingdom. 3 months ago, Kaiser confessed to Princess Aesing that he didn't know what love was until he met her. He was ready to do anything to get her to agree to marry him. Even though the prince's feelings meant a lot to her, she couldn't say yes, because she was the sole heir to the kingdom. The girl had to protect both her country and the ice powers passed down to her through generations. Lavi knew that Caesar was a kind and understanding guy. On that awful night, if she could have moved, she definitely would have looked to him for help. And now, here he was, asking her to come with him to the Water Kingdom. The earring on her ear flared up, burning her lobe like crazy. She felt this intense pressure, like she had, to refuse Kaiser's offer. So, Lavia apologized and said she was going to rely on Zighelm's advice, since she'd already asked him about it. The prince wanted to know why she was so dependent on the Flame Emperor. Lavia couldn't tell him that Zighelm was the only one who could keep her powers in check. So, the emperor answered for her, saying Fregund was already looking into the attack on the kingdom. And besides, he was the only one who could make Princess Lavia's dream come true. Kaiser shot back, saying that in that case, he'd investigate it himself. He was sure that if he exposed the real culprit, Lavia would have no reason to stay in the empire anymore. The two men locked eyes, a silent challenge passing between them. After kissing the princess's hand, Kaiser asked her to wait for him, promising to prove he was the one destined to be her true champion. On her way back to the empire, the heroine couldn't stop thinking about running into Prince Shawati again. He seemed genuinely concerned for her, and she was relieved he knew she was still alive. Turning to Zighelm, Lavia asked him what he was so ticked off about. Even though the emperor pretended not to know what she meant, the heroine told him to cut the crap. Because the second Caesar suggested she go with him, the earring in her ear started burning like crazy. Zighelm remained stubbornly silent, avoiding even making eye contact. Lavia reminded him about their contract, saying she wasn't going anywhere, even though Caesar could probably grant her wish too. Zighelm turned away and stared silently out the window for a long moment. Then he suddenly jumped up, crouched down next to her, and said her words made it sound like she'd bail if they didn't have a contract. Lavia started to say something, but Zighelm suddenly reached out and kissed her on the lips. She tried to push him away, but he pulled her back and kept kissing her. She felt her body reacting to the emperor's touch, but couldn't understand why he was doing this, since she wasn't showing any signs of distress. Then, out of nowhere, Zighelm reminded her of her words about seeking help elsewhere if he proved useless to her. He decided to set things straight, adding that if she unilaterally decided to break their contract, she'd have to repay him for everything he'd done for her up to that point. His eyes at that moment gleamed like a predator who wouldn't let go of its prey. Looking into them, she asked why Zighelm was being so impatient, because it was totally out of character for him. The emperor lowered his head, sighed, and apologized to Lavia. Then he suddenly grabbed her, pulled her onto his lap, and held her tight. Kissing Lavia's neck, Zighelm said he was the only one keeping her warm. The emperor suggested she cool him down for once, and running his hand over her chest, he burned her dress off. His hands roamed all over her, and he was sure she was loving it. Suddenly, she realized that even without being cold, she was melting from the emperor's touch alone. Thinking Lavia was getting overheated because of him, Zighelm whispered that jealousy was pretty dumb. A couple of days later, Micella walked into the room and saw her mistress searching for something. Lavia was looking for a letter her father had written her, but the maid hadn't seen it. She was sure she'd grabbed it from her father's secret room and brought it with her in the carriage. But ever since Zighelm pulled her onto his lap, her memory had been a blur. Everything that happened had gotten her so worked up that Lavia spiked a fever and collapsed into bed as soon as she got back to the palace. The emperor was definitely kicking himself for what happened and was pulling out all the stops to get back in her good graces. Ever since that day, Zighelm hadn't even been back to his own room, and our girl was getting worried about it. Noticing that her mistress was upset about something, Micella asked if there was anything she could do. Then, out of nowhere, she opened her arms wide and told Lavia she could cry on her shoulder if she needed to. Our girl gave Micella a big hug and thanked her for being so thoughtful. When they got back to looking for the letter, the maid pointed out that His Majesty wouldn't hide something that important in a chest. But since Zighelm had been super busy lately, she figured she'd go ask Vix. Micella barely got out the door before the guy himself showed up in the doorway. He held out an envelope to Lavia that he'd found tucked away in the corner of the carriage. She lit up like a Christmas tree and thanked Vix for being such a huge help. The heroine ripped open the envelope and started reading the letter her father said he'd written in case anything ever happened to him. Lavia was supposed to get this letter if their people faced a crisis, and she had no one else to turn to. In that case, her father advised her to seek help from Sieghelm von Fregemt. Reading this, the heroine couldn't believe the Ice King was actually connected to the Flame Emperor somehow. So she decided right then and there to ask Wix what kind of relationship her father had with Sieghelm. The guy looked confused and said, unfortunately, he couldn't answer that question himself. Not wanting to waste a second, the heroine spun around and bolted out of the room to ask the Emperor himself about everything. But Wix stopped her, telling her that His Majesty's mana was unfortunately unstable. Because of that, Sieghelm had isolated himself and locked himself away in the dungeon. Wix explained that His Majesty, just like Lady Lavia, had once experienced a surge of his powers. Ever since then, his mana's been going haywire, and he's been isolating himself to keep from hurting anyone. The heroine didn't know about this, and now she understood why Sieghelm acted that way in the carriage that day. Without a word, Levi turned around and left the room, and even though Vix tried to stop her, she was determined to suppress the Emperor's mana outburst. The heroine decided to put aside the question of his behavior in the carriage and his connection to her father for now. She imagined the pain he had to be going through, and it hurt her just as much. Stepping into the hallway, the girl sensed where Sieghelm's mana was coming from and headed in that direction. Vix rushed after her, repeating that His Majesty had forbidden anyone from approaching him. However, Levi realized that the guy told her the truth, because deep down, he was hoping for her help. She declared that when her powers get out of control, her body freezes up, and it becomes unbearably painful. She couldn't let the Emperor suffer like that, imagining the pain he was going through, consumed by the heat of his own mana. Unable to argue with Lavia, Vix escorted her to the dungeon. The heroine touched the handle of the iron door and felt how scorching hot it was. Using her aura, Lavia cooled the metal down and was able to go inside. Sieghelm was sitting in the room, which was completely engulfed in flames. Even though the heroine was seeing this for the first time, somehow the whole scene felt strangely familiar. The Emperor turned to the girl and asked why she had come to the dungeon. Lavia walked up to him and replied that she had come to help. Realizing that Vix had spilled the beans, Sieghelm was furious at his assistant, who clearly couldn't keep his mouth shut. You could see the unbearable agony he was in written all over his face. The heroine got up to cool down the room, activating her ice mana, but the fire was spreading faster than her power, and Sieghelm told Lavia to leave, saying it was pointless. He tried to convince her that he'd be okay, and she just needed to wait it out. But the heroine saw how much he was suffering, and, gently touching his cheek, asked why he wasn't using her. Sieghelm pushed her hand away, saying it wasn't part of their agreement, and besides, he couldn't control himself in moments like these. Then the Emperor added that if Lavia stayed with him, he wouldn't be able to hold back, just like in the carriage. The heroine cupped his face in her hands, looked him in the eyes, and suggested adding it to the agreement from now on. With those words, she kissed him on the lips, breathing her icy power into the man. At first, Sieghelm returned her kiss, but then suddenly pushed the girl away. He begged her to stop and get out of there while he still had some sense left. He was in no shape to think or worry about Lavia, but she was sure the Emperor desired her coldness as much as she usually craved his warmth. She stood up and with a swift motion threw off her dress, which instantly burned to ashes. Touching the Emperor's solid chest, she asked why his clothes weren't burning and if they were made of some special material. Then Lavia moved even closer to Sieghelm and pressed herself against him, and he, barely holding back, demanded she explain what she was up to. Trembling all over, the Emperor wondered if she was really trying to go up in smoke. However, she told him to stop underestimating her and promised to cool him down until he was freezing. Unable to resist any longer, Sieghelm embraced the girl and pulled her close. Vix stood before the red-haired girl and was getting antsy, since it had been 5 hours since Lady Lavia went down into the dungeon. He was worried about the princess and already regretting telling her everything. Easy there, Yuji. The first princess of the Fregemt Empire told him to chill out. She said she would have done the same thing if she'd been there. Just then, the Emperor burst into the room, holding Lavia wrapped in a sheet. Even though she insisted she was fine, he ordered them to check her out ASAP. Sieghelm was seriously worried. She'd absorbed way too much of his fire energy and could be in trouble. Once they were alone, Yuji introduced herself to Lavia. She was Sieghelm's older sister and a researcher of supernatural abilities. Since she specialized in mana research, She offered to take care of Lavia. The heroine started to introduce herself to the princess, but she already knew who she was and suggested they get down to business. During the examination, Lavia apologized for not greeting her properly earlier. Yuji smiled and said she had nothing to apologize for, since it was all her brother's fault and his clingy possessiveness. Zieghelm, sitting behind the screen, told his sister to cut the pointless chatter and get to work. But Yuji coldly replied that the conversation was part of the medical examination. Then she told her brother to shut his trap, calling him a real dog for it. The heroine thought to herself that the girl had a sharp tongue, just as you'd expect from the Flame Emperor's older sister. Lavia said shyly that Zieg had given her permission to do whatever she wanted. Yuji smirked, hearing how affectionately the girl shortened the Emperor's name. Finishing the examination, she concluded that, as expected of the Ice Princess, she didn't have a single burn. After that, Yuji approached her brother to check the state of his mana now. She still needed to think about Lavia's mana, and she promised to give a report later. The heroine noticed Lady Yuji's stern expression and figured something must be going on with their bodies. As the sun set, Zieghelm and Lavia went for a stroll in the garden. The Emperor stared at the girl for a long time, then suddenly declared that if anything happened to her, he'd be responsible. After a short pause, he apologized for being harsh with Lavia. The heroine told him not to worry about it, because even knowing all the risks, she would still have done the same thing. The Emperor wanted to know why she'd gone to such lengths for him. Lavia turned to him and confessed that it all had to do with a letter her father had left for her. The king wrote that in the event of a crisis in their country, she could only rely on Zieghelm. The heroine lowered her head and apologized for doubting his relationship with her father. Even though the Emperor seemed surprised himself, the girl wanted to know exactly what tied him to King Aeson. So, Zieghelm confessed that her father had been helping him keep his mana surges under control. He'd been sending ice charms to the Empire to keep the basement from overheating, and ice to cool the Emperor's body. It finally clicked for Lavi why Zieghelm kept talking about owing her father. The Emperor took her hand, suggesting she go back to her room, saying he was worried about her. The heroine felt like he was just trying to cut the conversation short. She was sure the Flame Emperor was still keeping something from her. Maybe if Lavi could learn more about Zieghelm, she'd understand why her father helped the guy who had all the kingdoms living in fear. The next day, the heroine and the Emperor met with Yuji to hear her assessment of their mana situation. As for Lavi's mana, it was in perfect condition and had fully absorbed the fire energy. And Zieghelm's mana was surprisingly stable, considering that last outburst. On top of that, her condition was actually better than it had ever been, which meant the more their mana intertwined, the more stable they both became. So, if they wanted to get a handle on their powers fast, they needed to keep doing what they were doing. Instead of only doing it when their mana went haywire, Yuji suggested they regularly absorb each other's energy, even in their day-to-day lives. Of course, our girl wanted to master her powers ASAP, but she was still thrown by the princess's idea. Noticing it on her face, Yuji smiled and suggested that Lovey and her have a private chat. Later, over tea in the greenhouse, the princess said that now that Zieghelm was back to his duties, she was ready to listen if something was bothering her. Yuji was sure that some things were just easier to talk about with another woman. Like, for example, the whole question of the chances of getting pregnant after, that, with Zieghelm. And then Yuji just dropped the bomb that there was nothing to worry about, since their royal bloodline usually wasn't very, fruitful. When Freygard needed an heir, they had to take a special medicine passed down through their family for generations. Yuji asked Lavia if she wanted to know anything else. For example, she could tell the girl a lot about abilities and mana. But the heroine was more interested in why the princess was doing research, being a member of the royal family. Smiling, Yuji replied that she wanted to support her younger brother, who was being raised as a weapon of war. Zieghelm was born with the strongest fire ability in history. Their father, the former emperor, sent his son to war when he was still just a kid. The boy was basically a walking, talking flamethrower. Zieghelm grew up forced to suppress his own emotions and follow his father's orders. Over time, his powers started to spiral out of control, and it caused him a lot of pain. Yuji tried to help her brother, but they wouldn't let her near him. She'd read in books that these kinds of outbursts could be caused by major mental stress. So, the girl went to her father and begged him to stop sending Zieghelm to the battlefield. She said her brother was suffering, didn't want to kill anyone anymore, and that's why his powers were going haywire. But instead of answering, her father just glared at her and smacked her hard. He told Yuji to shut her mouth because she was just a useless kid with no abilities of her own. Grinding his foot into the girl, pinning her to the floor, the emperor declared that Zighelm was his weapon, and she was just a tool for a political marriage. And tools don't get to have opinions. Yuji knew that if this kept up, and her brother's powers kept spiraling out of control, it could destroy him. So, sobbing her eyes out, she decided she had to help Zighelm no matter what, and started studying books about superpowers. And that's how the princess finished her story about why she started doing research. The heroine had no clue just how messed up the previous emperor really was. Yuji asked Lavia if she was curious about how things changed later on. First off, the princess focused on her ice mana to neutralize and weaken her brother's fire mana. Yuji secretly contacted her grandpa, who was emperor before their dad. With his help, she managed to get her hands on ice made with supernatural powers from the kingdom of Aeson. After that, with her grandpa's support, Zighelm's humanity slowly started to come back. But their dad, finding out about all this, was totally against these changes. He took out the grandpa who was behind it all. But in the end, Zighelm avenged his death and became emperor himself. In Yuji's opinion, her brother was an awesome ruler. But ironically, other countries feared him even more than their cruel father. After all, Zighelm's past actions are the reason he was known as such a dangerous guy. That's why the Flame Emperor still got to carry the weight of his old sins. That night, sitting up in bed, she was thinking about everything Lady Yugi had told her. Her dad must have been sympathetic to Zighelm and helped him out, but kept it hush-hush because he was scared of the old emperor. King Aeson knew about the Flame Emperor's past and how he'd changed. That must be why her dad wrote to Lavia that she could trust Zighelm. Walking into the room, the emperor saw Lavia still wasn't asleep. She said she was just thinking, and Zighelm sat down next to her. She caught a whiff of his nice, clean smell after his bath, and it was totally throwing her off. The heroine suddenly remembered Yugi's words about them needing to keep things moving forward. Flustered by her own thoughts, she climbed into bed, pulled the covers up, and turned away from Zighelm. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face and asked what was wrong. Lavia's silence made Zighelm think she was trying to tease him, and he moved closer. Yuji's words kept replaying in her head, and she figured the emperor just wanted to quickly gain control of his own mana. Zighelm took her silence as a yes and turned her to face him. Kissing her, the emperor chuckled, saying that after she told him he could do whatever he wanted with her that day, her innocent expression now looked pretty weird. Lavia replied, embarrassed, that she'd been acting crazy before because her life was still in danger. Zighelm promised he'd be gentle this time and wouldn't do anything she didn't like. She made him swear that if he broke his promise, his punishment would be to obey her every command. Zighelm agreed and kissed her again, this time on the forehead. Vix was banging on the door first thing this morning, and the emperor told him to come in. Stepping into the room, the aide could feel the tension between Zighelm and Lavia, who were sitting with their backs to each other. Vix walked over to His Majesty to find out what was going on between them. Ordering him to mind his own business, Zighelm turned away, looking annoyed. Then, Vix informed the emperor that messengers from the kingdom of Shawadi had arrived, requesting a meeting with Lady Lavia. Hearing this, the heroine figured Cassar probably sent them. But Zighelm, without missing a beat, curtly told Vix to send them packing. The heroine jumped up and asked Zig to stop, saying she wanted to meet with the messengers. The emperor was firm in his decision, not wanting to open the gates to those rude jerks who dared to show up unannounced. And then Lavia reminded Zighelm about his promise to obey her if he broke his word. Glancing sideways at the heroine, the emperor ordered Vix to receive the ambassadors and prepare a banquet. A little while later, Zighelm, Lavia, and Caesar were already sitting together at the table. The prince thanked the emperor for the warm welcome they'd received, even though they'd arrived unannounced. Zighelm pointed out that Caesar had hidden his identity and snuck into the palace with the envoys. Prince Shawadi, seemingly oblivious to his snarky tone, replied with a casual smile that he just wanted to surprise Lavia. He came to check on the princess, see how she was doing here, and find out if anything was bothering her. The heroine was touched that Caesar had come all the way just because he was worried about her. However, Zighelm stated that in that case, Prince Shawadi should just head back home and chill out. When Lavia tried to object to the emperor, Caesar didn't miss the fact that she called him Zig. Furthermore, he noticed the earrings they were wearing, made from each other's mana. The heroine froze, totally lost on how to explain this to him. Then, out of nowhere, Caesar turned to the emperor and said he'd heard that he was looking for a woman who wouldn't burn up in his hands. He wanted to know if Zighelm was using Lavia's vulnerability to lure her into a trap and keep her around. The emperor snapped back that he wasn't interested in forcing himself on any woman. Sensing the tension, Lavia smiled and told Caesar that Zighelm was good to her, and he didn't need to worry. After a moment of thought, the prince said that was good, if that was really the case. Then he suddenly asked Lavia if she remembered his offer from 3 months ago. Caesar said his feelings hadn't changed, and so he asked her to reconsider his offer to go with him to the Water Kingdom. The heroine sadly lowered her eyes and apologized to the prince, but he cut her off, saying that he should be the one apologizing, because after what happened to her homeland, she had more important things on her mind. After dinner, Lavia felt super on edge. She could even feel the tips of her fingers starting to freeze. Caesar was sharp as hell, and sooner or later he'd figure out she'd been intimate with the emperor. Zighelm touched her hand and noticed how cold she was. Her touch was so cold it started icing up his own hand. Just then, Lavia heard Caesar and Vix's voices nearby. The prince was thanking the kid for getting the rooms ready for his delegation, and Vix apologized that the rooms were so far away, 'cause they had to rush the preparations. Hearing the voices getting closer, Lavia told the emperor to hurry up and melt the ice. But Zighelm was too hammered, so his powers were seriously weakened. The heroine anxiously remembered Yuji telling her about how alcohol messes with your mana. Lavia was totally lost and didn't know what to do. She didn't want the Shawadi people seeing her like this. The emperor grabbed her and pulled her behind the nearest door. Just then, the people they were hiding from walked past, and Caesar kept telling Vix he hadn't expected such a warm welcome. Standing in the cramped, narrow storage room, she looked up and noticed the emperor was doing something weird. Holding her hand with his freezing one, he was, trying to warm it up, melt the ice, you know? Suddenly, Caesar stopped at the window and asked Vix how Lady Lavia usually spends her days in the palace. He wanted to know if she was doing okay and if people were treating her well. He was also curious if the Flame Emperor had done anything at all, that might have upset her. Vix knew he had to stay neutral to avoid making His Majesty look bad. Meanwhile, Zighelm was still trying to, warm her up. This ice should have melted by now, but it's just not happening. The heroine asked if it had something to do with the alcohol messing with his mana control. Zighelm said he could handle it if he took his time, and started kissing her neck. Lavi told him to stop, because Caesar and the others were right outside in the hall. The emperor froze for a second, but then went right back to kissing her neck. When she asked how drunk he was, Zighelm said he'd do it even if he was sober. Suddenly, a sound from behind the closet door echoed loudly through the hallway, and everyone standing there whipped around. Lost in the moment, the emperor didn't notice he'd knocked something off the table. Now he and Levi were frozen, waiting to see what happened. Meanwhile, Vix explained to the guests that something must have just fallen in the storage room, and suggested they head to their rooms. Later, holding her close, Zighelm apologized and admitted he'd never gotten drunk that fast before. Their hands suddenly started to thaw, finally warmed by the heat radiating from him. In the morning, while Marcella brushed the heroine's hair, she examined her hands. She was trying to figure out exactly when they thawed, and if Zighelm had done it while she was already asleep. The memory flashed vividly. Last night, they got intimate in the storage room. Marcella noticed a mark on her mistress's neck and tactfully suggested a hairstyle suitable for receiving the delegation. The servant deliberately left Lavia's hair down, emphasizing that it suited her much better that way. Later, the heroine went to the meeting, where, in addition to the emperor and Caesar with his delegation, Lady Yuji was also present. The prince once again thanked the Fragums for their hospitality and suggested moving on to the main topic. He had completed his own investigation and was ready to reveal the reason for the fall of the Acing Kingdom. The emperor sarcastically pointed out that Caesar could have told them this yesterday. Sensing the tension rising again between the guys, Lavia asked the prince to get on with his story. According to Caesar, the night of the incident, the kingdom was covered in a fog that turned people to stone. He'd never heard of magic like that before, but he couldn't rule out the development of some new ability technique. The Fog Kingdom and the Earth Kingdom were the prime suspects. The heroine knew the Fog Kingdom was famous for projecting illusions using fog, and the Earth Kingdom had the power to create and control stone golems. Still, there was no way to be sure if they'd been experimenting with previously unknown ways to use their powers. As it turned out, Yuji was already doing research in those areas, so she promised to let them know if she found anything. The heroine sighed and sadly mentioned that they might have learned something if they'd caught that mercenary. She explained how he attacked her father, and they both ended up killing each other. When Kaiser heard about it, he asked about the criminal's body. Zekilm said it must have regenerated after he saved Lavia. Either way, the investigation team he sent to Asen later couldn't confirm the body was even there. The Emperor apologized for not telling her sooner, saying he didn't want her to worry. Kaiser admitted that he'd been bugged the whole time about why Lavia didn't turn to stone like everyone else. The heroine repeated what her father said. The fog only affected people without powers. Suddenly, a bright light flashed outside the window, and Zehelm and Kaiser exchanged glances. The glass shattered right behind the heroine, and a small green ball flew into the room. It exploded with a deafening bang, and the whole place filled with acrid green smoke. Lavia opened her eyes and suddenly realized she couldn't see anything. At that very moment, a figure appeared out of nowhere right above her head, face hidden by a mask. A dagger flashed in his hand, ready to plunge down on our girl. But the would-be killer didn't get a chance, because two massive waves of fire and water power grabbed him, knocking the weapon right out of his grip. Kaiser and Zehelm, crackling with mana, shielded Lavia and glared at the lowlife who'd walked right into their trap. The assassin was still trying to grab his dagger, but the Emperor held him tight with fire. While the guy, gritting his teeth, writhed in pain, Zehelm demanded to know who sent him. Coughing up blood, the man said he'd take them all down, every last one. With those words, he collapsed to the floor, a pool of blood spreading around him. Vix checked the assassin and confirmed he was dead, probably poisoned himself beforehand. The heroine noticed this guy was dressed just like the one who killed her father, meaning they're still coming after her. The Emperor turned to say something to Lavia, and his eyes suddenly blazed with fury. Kaiser put his arm around the girl, comforting her and repeating that he was there for her. The heroine felt Prince Kaiser's soothing water energy flowing like a stream. She thanked him for the peace he'd given her. Watching the calming effect of Prince Shawadi's mana, Yuji wondered if she could suppress Lavia's raging power. Overcome with a terrible wave of jealousy, Zehelm walked over to the heroine and put his arm around her shoulders. Just then, he noticed a strange bracelet on the girl's wrist. No one had ever seen it on her before, and everyone concluded that the killer had put it on Lavia. The Emperor asked the girl to hold out her hand so he could burn the bracelet off, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't do a thing. So Kaiser yanked Lavia away from Zehelm and told him to chill, scared he'd burn her to a crisp. The Emperor just glared at him, all, "No way I'd screw up that bad?" The heroine pulled them apart, saying she was fine, but the bracelet was still a no-go. So she tried to shatter it with a frozen spearhead she made with her powers. But that didn't do jack either. Zehelm on one side, Kaiser on the other, grabbed Lavia's hands, begging her to stop before she hurt herself. Yuji pointed out that even with the bracelet, the girl could still use her powers. The princess walked over to Lavia and asked to see her hand. Yuji didn't find any trace of special mana in the thing. When asked if she felt any pain or discomfort, the heroine said no. Just then, Vix stepped up to the Emperor, asking him to take a look at the dagger the attacker had been carrying. It had an emblem on it, the sigil of the Mist Kingdom. Kaiser wondered if the Mist Kingdom could be behind the attack on Asen, but Zehelm wasn't so sure about that. I mean, would guys who went to such lengths to completely erase the bandits' presence from Asen really bring something that could be traced back to them? They barged into a place where the Flame Emperor and the Water Prince were hanging out. Maybe they were just trying to throw suspicion somewhere else. Kaiser thought he had a point, but he still wasn't ready to rule out the Mist Kingdom. Because, like we said before, rumor has it that they're the ones who invented the petrification device. Since Shawadi had diplomatic ties with the Mist Kingdom, the prince decided to head back and try to dig something up. Before leaving, he told Zehelm to protect Lavia with his life, or else he'd bring his whole empire crashing down. The Emperor just brushed it off, said he didn't need to explain himself. The two guys locked eyes again, just radiating pure hate. Meanwhile, Yuji still couldn't get that bracelet off Lavia, but since it wasn't bothering her or anything, she figured she'd just keep an eye on it for now. As he said goodbye, Kaiser promised he'd be back next time with more intel. He told her to watch out for bandits and those pesky little critters they have in Fragumd. Lavia looked confused, so the prince explained she had a red mark on her neck. He whispered that maybe some kind of bug bit her while she was sleeping. Even though she said she hadn't noticed, she suddenly remembered exactly how that mark got there. After telling her to be careful, Kaiser leaned in and kissed Lavia right there. Zighelm, watching the whole thing, was getting angrier by the second. After the prince took off, the emperor suggested the heroin chill in his room after everything that went down. Lavia agreed, but she seemed kinda hesitant, so he asked if she'd be okay on her own. She smiled and, knowing Zighelm was busy, told him not to sweat it. Suddenly, the emperor leaned in and touched Lavia's neck. Running his finger over the mark, he told her to be more careful, 'cause she lets her guard down too easily. Blushing, the heroine shot back that it was his fault for leaving marks where anyone could see them. Zighelm replied that if they weren't visible, that kinda defeats the whole purpose. Lavia didn't get what he meant, but the emperor didn't explain and just summoned a firebird. He handed the bird to her, told her to keep it close, and promised to be back as soon as he wrapped things up. After Zighelm left, Misela suggested bringing the madam's lunch directly to her room. Levi, however, preferred to rest a bit first. Left alone, the heroine wondered exactly how to interpret the emperor's words. Touching her neck, she pondered if it was possessiveness or something more intense. For a guy who was helping Lavie as a favor to her father, Zighelm was way too hung up on her. Maybe it's because he wanted her to have his kids someday and didn't want to let her go. The heroine lay down on the bed and soon drifted off to sleep. There, she was a little girl again, sitting at a table, creating ice sculptures. Suddenly, hearing a painfully familiar voice behind her, she turned around and saw her father in front of her. He said someone had arrived and suggested she greet the guest, but she couldn't quite catch the name. On the way, the king was saying how much the guest liked her, and he, as her dad, was a little thrown. He said that thanks to Lavia, this guy was finally starting to show his better side. The girl didn't quite catch who her father was talking about. She couldn't make out the guy's name. After thinking about it for a bit, Lavia decided to ask him again. But she didn't get an answer because her father let go of her hand and started walking away from her, fast. And just like that, our girl relived the moment he was fatally wounded, and the Aeson Kingdom fell. Again, she saw the masked guy's dagger flash in the air, threatening to wipe everyone out. The girl screamed and tried to defend herself with her ice aura. The dagger-wielding guy froze solid, completely encased in ice. But then another assassin whispered from behind her, saying it was all for nothing. A giant hand reached down for Lavia from above, repeating that she couldn't escape. Tossed and turned in her sleep, haunted by terror and worry, the girl started to freeze. Meanwhile, back in his office, Zighelm was barking orders at members of the Imperial Army. Since there was still a chance some bandits were hiding in the castle, he told the first unit to stay on standby in case things went south. The second unit was to patrol inside the castle. The Emperor, meanwhile, was racking his brain, wondering why these guys were still trying to off Lavia when her kingdom was already toast. Suddenly, Zighelm's earring blasted his ear with a wave of intense cold. He jumped up, left the rest of the instructions to Wix, and bolted out of the office. Bursting into the bedroom, he found Lavia frozen solid, enveloped in the wings of a flaming bird. The Emperor rushed to the girl, but she was rambling in her sleep about her father. The heroine was shaking like a leaf, begging for help, and it took forever for Zighelm to finally wake her up. He held her tight, telling her to calm down, saying it was just a bad dream and the killer was gone. Catching her lost and terrified gaze, the Emperor repeated that they were alone in the room. Finally understanding, Lavia threw her arms around Zighelm's neck and held on tight. She was still trying to figure out if the whole nightmare had just been a dream. The girl started telling the Emperor about how her father just collapsed, how some thug attacked her, and how there was so much blood everywhere. Listening to her, Zighelm blamed himself for leaving her alone after the attack. He gently stroked Lavia's hair, held her close, and repeated that everything was okay. She was safe here, and she needed to forget the dream. The heroine didn't want to remember any of it either. She wanted to forget it all ASAP. But at the same time, something was bugging her. She suddenly grabbed Zig's shirt, pulled him close, and kissed him on the lips. So, Lavia asked him to help her stop thinking. Zighelm told her to trust him. They kissed again, and his warmth spread through her body. When she woke up, she felt a whole lot better. She noticed that Zighelm had changed her into one of his shirts. There were still bits of her burnt dress scattered on the bed. Lavia wondered if she could get outfits made from fireproof fabric too, and the Emperor was all for it. Watching Zighelm half asleep beside her, she thought about how kind he was, despite all the rumors about him in other countries. I mean, he was ready to give her anything she asked for. Lavia felt selfish compared to him, so she decided to wake him up and tell him something. When he opened his eyes, she declared that she would fulfill her end of the bargain. Zighelm was floored when he heard she was going to have his kid. The girl was convinced it was the only way to repay him for everything he'd done for her. A second later, Zighelm was all over Lavia, stunned that she could want more after what they got up to last night. Even though she tried to explain he had it all wrong, the Emperor had already tossed off his robe and started kissing her. Lavia begged him to stop, but that just fueled his fire even more. 2 hours later, she was back on his shoulder, completely drained. But Zighelm, unlike her, was still buzzing with energy, lying there, thoughtfully examining her bracelet. Lavia admitted it wasn't just annoying, but she was also freaked out by what effect the bracelet could have on her. According to the Emperor, there was a town on the southwest coast famous for its blacksmiths. Maybe they could find a tool there to get the bracelet off her wrist. The heroine's eyes lit up the second she heard about the ocean. Zighelm could have just summoned a blacksmith to the palace, but he noticed how stoked Lavia got. She clearly wanted to go herself. The kingdom of Aeson didn't have any ocean access, so the heroine had never seen the sea before. She was over the moon when Zighelm suggested they go together. The cloaked figure, watching in his magic orb, was furious that the fire-resistant bracelet had lost its listening and surveillance functions. Still, he could at least track the wearer's location with it. According to the map, they were in Sambian, on the southwest coast of the Phrygian Empire. Wix stared at the sea, bummed that the weather was so overcast and damp when they arrived. Even so, the view from where they stood with Princess Lavia and Marcella was incredible. The heroine just stood there, like she was frozen, staring at the ocean, unable to tear her eyes away. Wix figures, once the Emperor sees Lady Levi having such a great time, he'll decide to build a villa right here. The girl was surprised that Zighelm didn't already have a summer house in such a prime location, but Wix explained that His Majesty isn't really a beach bum. The Emperor's aide also mentioned they'd be staying at the residence of the local lord, Sambiana. Duke McBell was thrilled to welcome His Majesty to their humble little town. The girl next to him chimed in cheerfully, saying they'd been anticipating the beloved Emperor's visit. Even though Wix and Marcella chuckled quietly, something about the whole scene felt off to our girl. A maid whispered to Wix that he really ought to clue the lady in. So the guy told Levi that the girl, Lady Solha, is the daughter of the local ruler, Duke McBell. The Duke, see, is the younger brother of the late Emperor, and he was even considered to take over the empire back then. When Zighelm took the throne, McBell respectfully stepped aside, but now it seemed like he was hoping to make his daughter, Solwa, the Empress. Still, Wix was sure His Majesty wasn't giving the girl the time of day. Besides being the Emperor, Zighelm was also ridiculously handsome, so naturally some women had their sights set on him. The heroine felt Solhwa's eyes sizing her up. Feeling a little awkward, she turned away, figuring this girl shouldn't be hostile to someone like her. The Duke informed His Majesty that the banquet was ready for the guests. Solwa grabbed Zighelm's arm and offered to escort him, but the Emperor pulled his arm away and headed towards Lavia, ditching the banquet and asking for 2 meals to be brought to his room. Noticing the sadness on the girl's face, Zighelm asked if she'd been lonely while he was away. The girl shot back, saying she'd been chatting with Lord Vix, so she definitely wasn't bored. Imagining what kind of funny stories that kid was spinning for Lavia, the Emperor glared at him and demanded to know if it was true. After telling his aide the blacksmith would be a little late, Zighelm suggested they head down closer to the water. But Vix advised against it, saying the waves were too rough and it could be dangerous. Agreeing with his aide, the Emperor suggested Lavia take a stroll through town, and she happily agreed. Standing a little ways away, Sola watched them with a furious glare. Lavia and Zighelm, who had his face hidden by a cloak, set off on their walk through town with Vix and Marcella. They popped into a shop where she was checking out some amazing jewelry made from shells found in Sambian waters. Watching her, the Emperor whispered to Vix, asking if he should just buy her everything in the store, but the guy said it wasn't necessary. He advised His Majesty to avoid any over-the-top gestures while they were in town under the radar. Zighelm noticed Lavia checking out a white pearl hair clip, sparkling like ice. He immediately told the vendor they'd take it and asked him to put it in her hair. The clip was stunning, but she couldn't accept such an expensive gift. Zighelm stroked Lavia's face and said he really wanted to give it to her. He asked her to see it as a way of trying to win her over and to please accept it. Finally, she agreed and thanked the Emperor. When he asked if she liked anything else, Lavia said she was more than satisfied and led him out of the store. She was freaking out that one little trinket cost as much as her entire kingdom's budget. As they passed a swimsuit shop, the saleswoman stopped Lavia and offered her one of her items. The outfit was way too revealing, and she refused, saying she couldn't even swim anyway. But the saleswoman wasn't giving up, and asked the guy in the cloak standing nearby what he thought. Would the lady look good in a swimsuit like that? Zighelm smirked and said they wouldn't know until she tried it on. A little while later, he was already sitting outside the dressing room, waiting for Lavia to put on the swimsuit. The heroine was still confused, wondering if the women in this town really went into the ocean wearing something like that. She wouldn't come out of the dressing room, and the Emperor, unable to take it anymore, got up and went over there himself. He yanked back the curtain and saw Lavia in the swimsuit, and Zighelm was speechless. Then, he abruptly and silently closed the curtain again, leaving the heroine totally bewildered. Getting ticked off, she burst out of the dressing room and yelled for Zighelm to say something, since he was the one who made her put it on. The Emperor stood there flustered and red-faced, struggling to catch his breath. He turned away and said Lavia could change back if she was done trying it on. Giving him an innocent look, the girl asked why he was blushing. Then, Zighelm grabbed her hand and asked if she was ready to deal with the fallout from flirting with him in a place like this. Predictably, Lavia wasn't prepared for things to escalate like that, so she vanished behind the fitting room curtain faster than lightning. Standing there catching her breath, the heroine suddenly realized she'd just seen the Emperor flustered for the first time. The sun was already setting, so Wix suggested His Majesty head back to the residence. After making sure Lavia had a good time, the Emperor agreed to his aide's suggestion. The heroine noticed that as soon as they left the swimsuit shop, Zighelm went right back to his usual self. Suddenly, some kind of commotion broke out in the square, and people were running in droves toward the waterfront. Stopping one of the guys, Zighelm learned that some kids had fallen into the sea. The waves were too high, and nobody knew how to get them out. Without wasting a second, the heroine bolted in the same direction as everyone else. She squeezed through the crowd, who were all saying it was insane to launch a boat in this weather. 3 little kids, clinging to an oar floating in the water, were crying their eyes out. One of their mothers tried to jump in after them, but the others held her back. Just then, a shark fin popped up near the kids, and the screams around them got even louder. The heroine remembered Vix's orders to stay incognito, so she was afraid to use her powers and blow her cover. But Lavia couldn't just stand there and do nothing, so a second later, icy energy exploded out of her. Vix tried to stop her, but the Emperor gestured for him to let her be. The heroine aimed her power at the kids, and in an instant, they were on a chunk of ice above the water. The chunk slowly turned into a bridge, which was supposed to carry the little ones back to shore. But the shark swam closer, slamming against the ice, trying to break through. Lavia couldn't focus on the predator. She had to control her mana so she wouldn't accidentally freeze the kids. Suddenly, a huge ball of fire blasted the shark, knocking it away from the ice bridge. Turning around, she saw Zighelm next to her, no longer hiding, helping her out. He took on the shark, telling Lavia to take care of the children. Standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, they used their powers to save the little ones from danger. After a while, the locals hauled the massive carcass of the predator onto the shore. The rescued kids ran to their mothers on the beach, who couldn't hold back tears of joy. The crowd that had gathered expressed their gratitude to the Emperor. Zighelm replied that they should be thanking the girl standing next to him. The village elder asked the heroine if she hailed from Isen, and Lavia confirmed his guess. The crowd started whispering about the fall of the Aeson kingdom. There was no doubt the news had spread. The rescued kids ran up to Lavia to thank her and gush about how beautiful the ice was. The girl was just happy they were safe. It made her miss hanging out with the kids back in her own kingdom. Zieghelm thanked the heroine too, saying his flame power would have been useless without her. Lavia asked, a little flustered, if he was mad that she'd jumped into action on her own. But the Emperor wasn't angry. That part of her, the part that rushed in to help without hesitation, he admired it. The heroine blushed and thanked him for using his power as well. The day ended, and Lavia, wearing her new swimsuit, went to take a warm bath. She was thinking about Zieghelm, who fearlessly helped her rescue the kids, not caring if his identity was exposed. The girl smiled, realizing she admired that side of him too. Plus, she couldn't get that cute, flustered look on his face in the store out of her head. The heroine smiled again, and just then, Zieghelm himself walked into the bathroom, only covered by a towel from the waist down. Unlike his castle, this residence didn't have a thermostat, and the Emperor was worried about damaging the tub with his heat. So, claiming he needed Lavia to cool the water down, he climbed in and sat next to her. Before she could say anything, Zieghelm noticed she was already wearing her new swimsuit. The girl replied that Marcella had insisted, that's all. Announcing that he wanted to get a good look, the Emperor pulled Lavia close. The man confessed that in that outfit, he wanted to lock her away where no one else could see her. Since Zieghelm wasn't blushing anymore, and it wasn't cute anymore either, Lavia said she didn't want to boil alive and started to get out of the water. But the Emperor pulled her back and gave her a playful nip on the neck. Undoing her swimsuit with his lips, he said he managed to hold back at the store, but now she wasn't going anywhere. Lavia remarked that it was definitely getting too hot in the water. But Zieghelm wasn't worried about breaking anything anymore and promised to take responsibility and fix it if something happened. Still, the girl didn't think it was right to damage someone else's property while doing something so inadvisable. Grabbing his hands, she said that Fregumd might be a rich empire, but they shouldn't forget about proper behavior. Putting ice cuffs on Zieghelm, Lavia added that she'd adjusted the temperature for him. Before she knew it, the ice evaporated and freed his hands. The Emperor apologized, saying his body temperature must have risen from laughing so much. He pulled Lavia onto his lap again and started kissing all over her body. She gasped, horrified at how loud the echoes were in the room. Almost crying, she begged Zieghelm to move to the bed if he really wanted to, but not to do anything in the bathroom. The Emperor stroked her face and said that when she asked so sweetly, he wanted to listen to her, but that it just turned him on even more. So any blame for his behavior was entirely on her. Annoyed, Lavia climbed out of the water, leaving him to bathe alone. She barely made it out of the room when Zieghelm had somehow managed to take off her undergarments. She demanded he give back what he stole, but the Emperor refused and, approaching her, swept her into his arms. Later, they sat in the room, sipping wine and snacking on fruit. Lavia's hands trembled as she recalled what had happened between them in the bathroom. As the Emperor fed her grapes, she wondered if getting intimate with him would actually stabilize her mana. Suddenly, Vix knocked and announced he'd brought the blacksmith. An old man entered the room, and the Emperor ordered him to remove the bracelet from the girl's wrist. The blacksmith carefully examined the item, which turned out to be quite rare and made from a tungsten alloy. This alloy is pretty resistant to impacts and fire, and they used to use it to build castles in Fregumda. That made the structures fireproof, and they mostly built dungeons out of this alloy. They did that because regular dungeons couldn't hold people with supernatural abilities. Just then, Lavia suddenly felt her earring getting really hot. The Emperor told the old man to take the bracelet off right now and break it if he had to. But the blacksmith replied that removing this jewelry would require a special tool. Even though that tool was ancient, the guy thankfully knew where to snag one. Then, he turned to the heroine and thanked her for saving his great-grandson, who took a tumble into the sea tonight. The blacksmith asked her to hang tight and promised he'd definitely free the princess from that bracelet. After everyone cleared out, Lavia noticed something was up with Zieghelm. But when she asked him about it, he clammed up. The girl noticed the earring in her ear got hot when the conversation drifted to the castle dungeon. The former emperor of Fregumda must have locked Zieghelm down there for discipline when he was a kid. The emperor's always been there for Lavia, so she wants to be a source of strength for him too. Sweetly calling him Zig, she asked in a soft voice if anything happened to him in the dungeon. The emperor's expression instantly changed. Turning away from her, he replied that whoever she'd been talking to, it was something she didn't need to know about. Realizing how much pain those memories caused him, Lavia apologized to Zigelm. He popped a grape into her mouth and told her she had nothing to apologize for. It was just a personal issue. The Emperor's voice was the same as always, but his eyes were colder than usual. Zigelm suggested she get some rest, and then went off to talk to the Duke. The next morning, she was having breakfast alone on the veranda, since the Emperor hadn't returned to their room all night. Sadly gazing at the ocean view, she wondered if he was really that mad at her because of their conversation. Suddenly, Lady Solha approached Lavia and asked if it was true that she was the only survivor of the fallen kingdom of Aeson. The lady commented that the princess was very lucky that His Majesty had taken her to his castle. The heroine confirmed her words and added that she was very grateful to Zigelm for it. Then, Solha, still smiling, asked if Lavia had fallen for the Emperor, even though the thought of it made her skin crawl. Even though the main character rushed to reassure her, the girl figured the princess was probably hoping to snag His Majesty with her ice powers. Either way, she straight up told Lavia not to get any ideas about being special. With that, Sola snuffed out a candle on the table with her bare hand, squeezing it tight. Grinning like a Cheshire cat, the girl added that she'd be the one marrying the Emperor in the end. The main character jumped up, freaked out that Solha might have burned herself, but she told her not to worry because she was, pretty resistant to fire. Remembering the girl was the former Emperor's niece, Lavia asked if she had fire powers, but Sola shot that down, saying that even without powers, she could totally win His Majesty's heart. She claimed that Zigelm had visited her the night before, and they'd had a very nice evening together. Getting right up in Lavia's face, Solha gave her a serious warning to know her place and remember once and for all that she didn't belong in Fregumda. Head down, the heroine promised the girl she'd be careful. Alone again, she wondered if maybe she'd been too proud, thinking she could actually be useful. But now it was pretty damn clear that she wasn't necessarily the only one who could help Zigelm. Lost in thought, Lavia didn't even notice she'd wandered all the way to the beach. If she hadn't made that deal with Zigelm, she'd be drifting aimlessly right now, like a piece of driftwood. Dipping her toes in the water, the girl suddenly realized how terrified she was of losing this place. The heroine had no idea where she'd go when her contract with Zigelm was up, and she finally learned the truth about her kingdom's fall. Meanwhile, the Emperor was tearing the place apart looking for Lavia, not understanding where she could have gone. Finally, he spotted her walking into the sea, looking totally heartbroken. Zigelm yelled and charged into the water to stop her, grabbing her arm. When Levi looked up and met his eyes, he pulled her close and held her tight. The heroine was totally confused, but he just kept saying she couldn't leave him. Zigelm couldn't stand the thought of losing her, not since he found her freezing body in Azine. That day, he carefully scooped her up in his arms, trying not to break the ice she'd become. That was the Emperor's first kiss, because if she had died, his whole life would have been meaningless. Even if Levi didn't remember anything, Zigelm just wanted her to stay alive. He was even willing to settle for a relationship without love, based only on, well, you know, even if it meant pushing her heart, the one thing he wanted most, even further away from him. When the kingdom of Aeson fell, that same night, Wix asked the Emperor if they would tell Lady Levi about the past. But Zigelm was afraid that after losing both her father and her homeland, learning what he'd done would cause her to completely lose control of her powers. That's why he didn't want to burden Lavia any further. Zigelm didn't need much, just that she never find out why he was so obsessed with her. And the only thing he begged Lavia, holding her tight in the sea, was that she never, ever disappear on him. Not understanding at all, the heroine replied that she never planned to disappear anywhere. She just wanted to get her feet wet and wasn't going to go any deeper. Zigelm sighed heavily and asked her not to mislead him like that again, because he thought the waves were about to carry her away. The heroine felt how much his hand, resting on her waist, was trembling. Smiling, she told him not to worry, and declared that she wasn't going anywhere until she fulfilled her part of the contract. When asked why she came to the sea alone, Lavia replied that she just felt a strong urge to look at the ocean. She thought that at that time of day, the water looked mystical and mesmerizing, but all Zigelm saw was a suffocating bottomless darkness. It was only after those words that the heroine realized what Wix meant when he said the Emperor hated the oceans. After a short silence, Zigelm guessed that maybe, with his fire powers, he instinctively felt incompatible with water. In response, Lavia pointed out that fire and ice were incompatible too then. Finally smiling, Ziegelm declared that ice was completely different. When she asked how he found her, the Emperor replied that he sensed her mana energy. The heroine apologized for him having to come all this way to find her. Then she added that he better head back to Solcha now. Words that really surprised Ziegelm. Lavia explained that after spending the night with that girl, she must be waiting for him. The Emperor was shocked by her words and demanded to know who exactly told her such a thing. Avoiding his eyes, she said she'd heard it straight from Solha herself. Ziegelm smiled, patted Lavia on the head, and told her not to worry. He didn't spend the night with that girl. He just went to talk to her dad, and Sola happened to be there too. The Emperor looked into her eyes and asked if she was jealous. But Lavia turned away, saying who he spends time with is none of her business. Ziegelm asked her not to stray too far, saying he couldn't bear it if she faded away. Bathed in moonlight, she stopped and reminded him she wasn't made of snow and ice, that she couldn't just melt and disappear. Saying nothing, the Emperor walked over, grabbed Lavia, hoisted her over his shoulder, and carried her out of the water. Even though she tried to resist, he declared it was time for them to head back. On the way, Ziegelm said that since he had to come into the water for her, she'd be keeping him company again tonight. The Emperor didn't put the girl down, even after they were inside the castle. He just kept carrying her on his shoulder. From around the corner, Sola watched them, her eyes burning with hatred for her rival. Not long before, her father had called her in to see if she'd been taking her medicine. Sola replied that she had. If he was talking about the stuff that makes her fire-resistant, she still had 2 more doses to go, one of which she had to slip to His Majesty so she could bear him a child. According to McBell, the Emperor being glued to the Ice Princess was already a huge problem for the nobles, but they were too scared to say anything. But for the sake of the Empire's stability, Ziegelm needed a suitable wife, and his visit to their residence was the perfect opportunity. Sola was ready to guide the Emperor down the right path and become His Majesty's bride. She'd adored Ziegelm even before he took the throne and had been living for the day she'd become his wife. Sola even choked down that awful medicine so she could handle his, nightly visits. And that's why she wasn't about to let some upstart get her claws into His Majesty. Solwa was about to take an enhancement for the first time, and she savored the thought of Ziegelm making her his own. The blacksmith rummaged through every crate in the warehouse and finally found the tool he needed. Suddenly, he felt the space filling with some kind of weird haze. The moment he realized it was fog, not smoke, a hand reached out from the darkness towards the old man. Vix came to inform His Majesty that the blacksmith, who was supposed to remove the bracelet from Levia's wrist, had been turned to stone. The tool itself couldn't be found anywhere, and it was obviously stolen. The Emperor got pissed and slammed his hand on the table in fury because someone was definitely trying to stop them from removing the bracelet. Turning to the window, he saw the girl and Marcella happily cleaning seashells they'd collected on the beach on the veranda. Ziegelm forbade Vix from telling Lavia about this so her mana wouldn't go haywire again. Then he ordered them to speed up the investigation and take care of those thugs hiding out in the country. The Duke walked into the office and said they had intel on that device they requested. Stepping into the hallway, the Emperor asked them to open a window because the air felt off. Obeying his request, the Duke revealed that, during the previous Emperor's reign, all tools capable of cutting tungsten alloy were destroyed on his orders. Ziegelm didn't know about that, but memories of those heavy-duty cuffs flashed through his mind. Solwa, who just walked up to them, asked the Emperor if he was all right and offered him a drink. Since they never managed to find that blacksmith's tool, the Duke suggested ordering a new one from the Kingdom of Mist. According to him, they're the only ones still working with alloys like that. Hearing about the Kingdom of Mist again, Ziegelm ordered the Duke to make the necessary arrangements. Meanwhile, Solwa watched him drink from the cup she brought, a pleased look on her face. The second the Duke left the room, Ziegelm felt something seriously messed up. His body just wouldn't obey him, and he dropped his goblet, gasping for air. Once she was sure the medicine was working, Solwa went to the window and pulled the curtain shut. Burning with heat, Ziegelm turned to the girl and demanded to know what she'd slipped into his drink. Solwa let her dress fall to the floor, reminding him that he wanted to marry someone who could handle his fire. The Emperor realized it was an aphrodisiac, and that weird fog in the room was just a distraction from the drink. He called Solwa disgusting and said he wanted nothing to do with her. The girl stepped closer and begged him not to say such hurtful things, but when she tried to touch him, she felt a searing burn. Solwa couldn't believe it. She was supposed to be resistant to fire. She begged Zighelm to chill out and stop, but he was so fired up he couldn't control his power. The Emperor felt a crushing weight on his body. The flames were causing him unbearable pain. Lavia's earring suddenly flared, and she knew Zighelm's mana had gone haywire again. Looking up, she suddenly saw fire blasting out of the second-story windows of the mansion. The heroine ordered Marcel to tell the Duke what happened and evacuate. Then she ran into the house. At the entrance to the room, she found Solha sitting on the floor in just her underwear, staring blankly. Zighelm was slumped on the couch in the burning room, his head down. Seeing this, Lavia demanded Solha confess immediately what she'd done. The girl started making excuses, but the heroine didn't care about anything except what exactly she did. Then, Sola admitted she gave Zighelm something to, enhance things, but she didn't have the antidote. Having gotten all the info she needed, Lavia, looking stern, ordered the girl to leave them alone immediately. Entering the room, she gently touched Zighelm's face with her cold hands, but he pushed her hand away and told her to get out of the room and not touch him. Even though she tried to explain that his mana was unstable, and she wanted to help him cool down, he didn't want her to see him like this. Lavia figured this wasn't the time to be worrying about stuff like that. And talk about not wanting to be seen in a compromising position, she'd already shown him plenty of herself. Finally, after a while, Lavia managed to put out the fire in the room, but Zighelm still looked like he couldn't move on his own. She couldn't believe how strong that love potion was, seeing him in this state, but she was determined to help the Emperor. She started pulling off his shirt to get rid of anything that could hurt him. Zighelm kept saying she shouldn't touch him, that she didn't know what she was doing. Lavi told him to shut up for just a minute, then kissed him on the lips. He suddenly seemed incredibly cute to her in that state, but now wasn't the time to think about that, so she quickly pushed those thoughts out of her head. She explained to Zighelm that she was going to do for him what he had done for her, save his life. Lavi's lips touched the Emperor's skin, even though she wasn't sure she was doing it right. Suddenly, she noticed something pretty weird. Even though the fiery energy was starting to fade, Zighelm's body temperature kept rising. Lavi ripped off her dress and climbed on top of him, and he was just pissed that he couldn't even enjoy the view because he felt so damn awful.